Polish farmers protested on the border with Lithuania on Friday, March 1st, against what they say are imports of Ukrainian grain through the Baltic country, something Vilnius denies. Some say that having Ukrainian grain brought to Lithuania and then re-exported to other countries wouldn't make commercial sense.
There is, pretty much no ground of saying that there is some schemes, criminal schemes of having Ukrainian grain brought to Lithuania and then back to other European countries, because it doesn't make any commercial sense. So I think the accusations are false. I think people that are organizing such events are mistaken. And this leads us into some, escalation and to some problems, logistical problems between European Union countries. So it's quite sad.
However, Polish farmers argue that some Ukrainian grain brought to Lithuania is later re-exported to other countries as European grain, even though it does not meet health and safety standards, protest organizer Karol Pieczyński said. Today's protest is taking place to draw attention to the uncontrolled flow of grain into the European single market, grain coming from Ukraine and Russia. Because this grain then comes into our country, it arrives in Lithuania, Latvia. Documents are changed, and those products are then distributed throughout Europe as a European product, which says they meet all standards, but they meet no sanitary standards. We want to stop or strongly limit Ukrainian imports, and if this product will be brought in, we want it to be safe, for it to meet the same standards that products produced by Polish farmers do. The EU has waived quotas and duties on imports from Ukraine after Russia's invasion in 2022. Countries neighboring Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia introduced national bans on imports of some Ukrainian food products, but allow their transits to other countries. Former detention center on Rakowiecka Street in Warsaw, site of imprisonment, show trials, cruel investigations, and torture of Polish soldiers of the independence underground. It is impossible to build a national community. It is impossible to nurture the identity of Poles without experiencing history together, without reflection from history, without reference to the independence trend. And such an important part of the independence trend is the phenomenon of the cursed soldiers. In front of the Wall of Death, delegations laid wreaths. In front of this brick wall, the fourth main board of the Freedom and Independence Association was executed on March 1st, 1951, including the president, Lieutenant Colonel Łukasz Ciepliński. That's why today we celebrate this day to commemorate these events. Soldiers of the extraterritorial Vilnius district of the Home Army were murdered. Certainly, soldiers of the 11th Operational Group of the National Armed Forces were murdered. And the list goes on. I bow down to these people. That's why they were called cursed soldiers. I had a wonderful grandfather.
Miałam wspaniałego dziadka.
Polish President Andrzej Duda presented a banner to the Territorial Defense Forces Command. During the ceremony, he referred to the dramatic situation in which the soldiers of the Polish underground found themselves under Soviet occupation. Those were dramatic years. It was, one could say, almost 20 dramatic years, because the last cursed soldier was murdered by the communists in 1963. Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of National Defense, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, along with Polish army commanders, laid wreaths at the Powązki Military Cemetery in the famous Eł quarters. They strived for a fully sovereign Polish state. We thank them for this. We pay tribute to them. The Eł quarters was one of the places where the communists in the Warsaw area secretly buried the victims of their crimes so that no one would know, so that they would be forgotten. The team, led by Professor Krzysztof Szwagrzyk, began exhumation work in 2012. A small number of young people were involved.
Ogromnie bolesne, że Polska nie odzyskała niepodległości.
Immensely painful that Poland did not regain its independence. We had put it out of consciousness at all during the conspiracy, that it could be that we would still have a second occupation after that.
Mieli drugą okupację.
This year, it was noticeable, the dramatically low attendance of authorities and government delegations at the commemoration of the Day of Remembrance of the cursed soldiers. This attitude should not come as a surprise. The liberal leftist camp has never been interested in restoring the memory of the cursed soldiers and has even fought against it.
Wszystkich zastanawia,
Everyone wonders why this government, which is already so far from the communist era, has again cursed the soldiers, why it is ashamed of this tradition, why it is running away from it, why portraits of the cursed soldiers are being torn down in government buildings. The National Day of Remembrance of the Cursed Soldiers has been celebrated since 2011. It was initiated by the late Polish president and professor Lech Kaczyński. Łukasz Żmuda, TV Republika. More than 8,000 of Alexei Navalny's supporters had been lining up since morning in a long line near the Moscow Orthodox Church, where a memorial service was held to pay tribute to the Kremlin regime's most famous critic. Let them see how many people know who he was. Such crowds cannot be silenced. There was an atmosphere of tension ahead of the funeral as authorities outlawed Navalny's movement as extremist and declared his supporters to be U.S.-backed anarchists. Since the morning, the Orthodox Church in Moscow's southeastern suburbs had been under special protection. The temple was surrounded by metal barriers and dozens of police vehicles, and even a few prisoner transport vehicles were parked nearby. I came because it was the only chance for me to say goodbye to Alexei. I admired his courage, his perseverance. I believe he was the #1 person in the opposition, an enemy of Putin. Why he is afraid of him even after his death, I don't understand. That's why I'm here. After the service at the Orthodox Church of the icon of the Mother of God, Humble My Sorrow, the coffin with Navalny's body was taken to Borisovsky Cemetery, 2.5 kilometers away. Navalny, a steadfast critic of President Putin, died on February 16th at the age of 47 in a penal colony, prompting reasonable suspicion not only by his supporters but by the international community that he had been murdered. Interest is growing at the shooting ranges in Poland. There has been a big increase. Hopefully, it is a sustainable increase. But this increase has already been recorded for a long time. Especially after Russia's attack on Ukraine, Poles want to be able to use weapons. You don't know when it will come in handy. Unfortunately, we live in quite dangerous times now. It's nothing that requires muscle or any gender skills. You just need to focus, listen to the instructor, and know how to hit the target. Training is necessary to obtain a gun permit. In Poland, 324,000 people have such a document. Nearly 41,000 permits were issued last year alone. This is a record, and that means Poles are better armed than ever before. At the end of the year, Poles had nearly 850,000 weapons. Still, the indicator when it comes to the number of weapons per population in Poland is relatively small. It is certainly an indicator showing that Poles want to own these weapons. They want to use the weapons, whether at the shooting range or just to feel safe. Awareness of the laws on gun ownership in Poland is currently growing, and despite the fact that there are more and more of them, this does not result in an increase in crime with this weapon. Polish society has already passed the test of universal access to weapons in an outstanding way, because already for a couple of years now, you can own such a thing, normally without any permits, on an ID card, and without tests. This pertains to black pistol weapons, which are even more effective than, for example, the popular Glock. Hence the calls to simplify the procedure to obtain a gun permit. So that you don't have to pretend to have a gun, that you are a sportsman, because at the moment you have to pretend that you are a sportsman or a collector. Both are absurd, so I bought a black powder gun. There are no jokes when it comes to guns, so it's important that everything is done according to the law. Adrian Borecki, TV Republika. Some light rain will be enough for Catalonia to avoid further emergency curbs on water use, a regional official said, as the Spanish region tackles its worst drought on record. Under a first phase of restrictions, residents have to cut their water usage by 5% and farmers by up to 80%. Rainfall would avoid a second wave of measures under a state of emergency, already affecting 6 million people in 200 towns and cities, including Spain's second largest city, Barcelona. David Mascort, the Catalonian regional government's environmental chief, raised the possibility of easing some of these, such as lifting the ban on filling swimming pools in the case of communal facilities. We need very little rain to not enter phase 2. That's how much water. That would not be a lot of water. If it would rain more or less between 150 and 200 liters per square meter in a week or 15 days, we would be out of the emergency. Will this happen? We have been waiting for it to rain as it should for 3 years. Some parts of the Iberian Peninsula are at their driest in 1,200 years, a 2022 study showed, forcing officials to consider bringing in water by ship to Barcelona, as in 2008, for essential services such as hospitals. Without enough rain, Barcelona would need not only to bring in water from a desalination plant near Valencia, but potentially also more water from neighboring Tarragona, as well as the French city of Marseille. Moreover, water use has fallen 16% year-on-year in some areas, and overall consumption is lower than in nearby regions.